While the leaders of France and Germany often meet, the French president is on his first state visit to Germany in nearly a quarter century. The Franco-German relationship has traditionally powered the European Union, especially since the end of World War II, but growing differences over defense, Ukraine, Russia, China, and EU finances now present a series of ever-growing challenges between these two European powerhouses. I'm Marijan Ayanar, and today's Newsmaker are the fault lines between France and Germany. For the first time in 24 years, French President Emmanuel Macron is in Germany for a 3-day-long rare ceremonial tour in order to show their commitment to Franco-German relations. The Élysée Palace and the Berlin Chancellery are divided on many crucial topics ranging from European defense and finances, relations with Beijing and Moscow, to the management of the war in Ukraine, along with nuclear power.
We don't know what this year will bring, but I'm quite sure if France and Germany stand together, if there is trust between Berlin and Paris and the will to work together, then we will get through this and other difficult periods in the European present.
And to tell Europe and the world that this state couple is neither old nor young. It is alive, demanding, ambitious for our two countries, ambitious for our Europe, and ambitious because I am convinced that our two countries carry something that is a little greater than even a certain idea of the universal.
The EU's largest economies have long been regarded as the driving force behind European integration. However, they share a multitude of policy differences, including their stance in the face of Russia's war in Ukraine. Both leaders recognize present challenges and want to help Ukraine. Germany has been slow to act, but it still has done a lot to help. It has welcomed over 1 million refugees and provided significant financial and military aid, totaling nearly $20 billion. France, on the other hand, has gained recognition for sending high-profile weapons like the César howitzers and Scout missiles. However, France's overall aid is considerably less compared to Germany's. One issue the two leaders can agree on is the ongoing rise of the far right in their own countries and across the continent. Nationalists and right-wingers are expected to do well in the upcoming European parliamentary elections, and domestically, Emmanuel Macron is threatened by the rising popularity of the National Rally Party, while Germany, the far-right AfD party, is also becoming a significant political challenge.
I consider it my particular responsibility to get involved in the European debate, even as president, in order to unmask, if I may say so, the ideas of the French far-right party National Rally, as the Prime Minister did a few days ago. And this is important because, as I mentioned earlier, the paradox in our countries is that extremes, in particular the far-right and nationalist movements, seem to seduce people. But often our compatriots forget that if these parties had been in charge, everything they value about Europe would not exist.
Joining me now from Paris is French columnist for the Telegraph, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Also on the program from Berlin, the coordinator at the SETA Foundation in Berlin is Zafer Mese, and also in the German capital, journalist and political analyst James Jackson. Welcome to all of you. James, let me begin with you. A lot of this rift between the two countries essentially comes down to Ukraine, doesn't it?
Ukraine is absolutely what's making this rift more painful, but I actually think it goes down to both the personnel difficulties between France and Macron, between Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron, but also, it has to be said, strategic differences and increasing competition between France and Germany. Ukraine has made that particularly sore, but particularly we also see on energy and trade, they have quite different interests. The Franco-German motor could be coming apart.
All right, so you mentioned strategic differences. Anne-Elisabeth, let me ask you, when the French president earlier in the year, when he suggested that the West shouldn't completely rule out putting troops on the ground in Ukraine, he knew that this was going to be a very uncomfortable topic. He knew that this was going to be a very uncomfortable suggestion, especially for the Germans.
He absolutely knew it. And he also, the whole point and the way it was explained after the conference in February where he said this was that in order to sort of provide ambiguity, what he called strategic ambiguity, he had to say this because it would wrong foot Vladimir Putin. I don't know whether that works or not, but I know that if there's one thing that the Germans especially do not like is something that's sprung on them without knowing that it's going to happen. That was probably the worst thing you can do to a German, and you can double that for someone like Olaf Scholz. So that was one of the things that didn't work out. It is perfectly true that there are NATO troops that are French in Romania, for instance, and that should something happen in Moldova, these troops will certainly be at the border. We don't know which side of the border, but so there's that. And there's also the fact that there is the same thing with help on Odessa from France. But we're not talking about a commitment to a war. And it's something that most other politicians in France reacted very badly to.
All right, not a commitment to war, but at least I think they wanted to see a commitment. Zafer Mese, let me turn to you. I mean, if what is happening in Ukraine is being framed as the biggest threat to continental Europe's security in the last 80 years, isn't it normal for there to be more expected from Germany, especially what Anne-Elisabeth was talking about, strategic ambiguity?
Yes, right. I mean, this is indeed the case. As you know, there was a classical role understanding between France and Germany until the very until the end of tenure of Chancellor Merkel. So Germany was the economic power, and France was the cultural and military power within the European Union, and both had a great success following the Second World War as the Franco-German axis. And now, at the end of the day, what we saw the last 2-3 years of Merkel, that Germany became more assertive and also took the step forward to also be more engaged in geopolitical issues. You know, the Berlin Libya conference. And France was really disappointed and was concerned and blamed Merkel that it was not coordinated with him. And this was the starting point. And we saw then in the following other regional crises, the Eastern Mediterranean crisis. As you know, Merkel was a mediator between Turkey and Greece. Some others, Merkel was championing for the full membership in the context of the enlargement of the European Union with the Balkan states, Northern Macedonia and Albania, and Macron was against. And we see within the period of time, we see a lot of adjustments of Macron on issues like the membership of Ukraine in the NATO. He was against it in the concert with the United States and Germany as well. Now all of a sudden changed a lot of positions and it was not coordinated with the other partners within the European Union and NATO, for example.
Yeah, you're referring to the unilateral steps or the accusations that would be made.
Exactly.
Anne-Elisabeth,
yes.
let me turn to you. Zafer Mese made a reference to Angela Merkel's sort of becoming more assertive. Analyze for me the French president's stance, because you actually made a reference to this in one of the articles that you recently published of Macron becoming or transitioning from a dove into a hawk. And it really plays into the underlying relations between these two leaders, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And it took Emmanuel Macron some time to realize that you do not deal with Russia the way you deal with a political opponent in parliament in a democratic relationship. You're dealing with somebody who has waged a savage war against a country on the continent of Europe and is essentially attacking by propaganda, by influence, by the sometimes hostile actions like, for instance, the stoking anti-Semitism in France right now in the wake of the Gaza conflict. All of this means that Russia is a hostile partner, and the idea that you can talk things through, I think that's gone from Emmanuel Macron. And he's also realized that NATO is the framework within Europe can defend itself. You can't sort of be ornery about it. So that is a change. It isn't actually, it's a sort of Damascene conversion. It is sincere. And that changes many things in terms of his relationship with Germany, because it's one thing to be assertive, but it's another to treat the German chancellor the way you treat your ministers and the MPs in your party.
James, let me turn to you. At the top of the show, you said that Ukraine is probably the most important issue, but you also highlighted personal differences. Okay, on the surface, when you look at this 3-day official visit, it is supposed to sort of highlight the strong bond between the two sides. But I'm curious to get your take in terms of how strong is the relationship between these two countries in reality, under the surface?
The relationship between France and Germany is pretty crucial and has historically been very crucial for the building of the European Union. What a lot of French and German politicians of a certain generation think is that that's the key to prosperity and peace in Europe. But I do think we're seeing a bit of a changing of the guard there. And I'm not convinced that Olaf Scholz continues to see Paris as his most important partner, particularly on security, because we've seen in many cases France and Macron being a bit of an outlier and giving some quite ambitious speeches. This goes back to his time working with Angela Merkel as well, where he proposed some quite ambitious reforms of the EU, but found Berlin to always be a bloc. However, Merkel really very much valued her collaboration with Macron and more so the collaboration with France as Germany's most important partner, the so-called Franco-German motor. I'm not sure we see that with Scholz, who seems to be reliant on the US as the primary backer. We've seen many cases where he's looked to the US for what to do, whether to give Leopard tanks or not, or Abrams tanks, or rather he only gave Leopard tanks after the US kind of gave a green light for Abrams tanks. Macron wants to stand for more European version of the security alliance, more European influence in NATO and possibly parallel structures to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which the US plays the largest part in. So I think it's actually, we're seeing real fissures in the European project which have come about. And we've seen other, as I mentioned earlier, other differences on the energy market. Of course, France gets 70% of its electricity from nuclear. And Macron was always opposed to the Nord Stream pipeline, Nord Stream 2, which delivered gas from Russia directly to Eastern Germany. So Macron thinks he's actually been proven right there. And a lot of people in Germany would now agree with him because of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, sort of proving the naysayers and the doom-mongers right. Scholz has moved on a lot more than people give him credit for, I think. And he's not necessarily a big fan of the theatrical style of Macron, who gives excellent speeches. He's done a speech even partly in German, which I'm sure was a lot of work for him to prepare for. But what Berlin keeps saying is, okay, Emmanuel, we've heard your pleas and your excellent speeches, but where's the money? Because Germany is, of course, one of the biggest suppliers of aid to Ukraine and is rearming its military and upgrading. It's a very long process, but they've announced huge sums of money to be going there, whereas France is still having to reach the 2% target. It's unclear whether they'll find room in their budget for that. On the other hand, people would say the French have an independent nuclear deterrent, and that costs a lot of money, whereas Germany is reliant on the US's.
Yeah. I'll sort of transition into that subject in just a bit, but Anne-Elisabeth, let me turn to you. I came across one characterization by a particular analyst when he was looking at the relationship, the Franco-German relationship. He said that, before it was about a relationship about disagreeing and then finding ways to compromise. I'm wondering, given what James has said, this is a new generation of politicians, and Olaf Scholz simply isn't buying that anymore? Is it right now about disagreeing and then making standing by your guns?
I'm going to give the French view on this one, and it was sort of very accurate the way it was just being described. But when we're talking about nuclear, France has a beef with Germany about nuclear power because Germany has historically been anti-nuclear power. There have been anti-nuclear military or civilian nuclear movements in Germany since the 70s and 80s, and we know since the fall of the Wall of Berlin that some of this was organized and helped by Soviet Russia for all sorts of interests. And we feel that still Germany right now is in hook to Russia on nuclear. And the more gas we buy from them and the less nuclear power we have, and the happier they are. So rightly or wrongly, Olaf Scholz, who's somebody who has a past as a left-winger, hard left-winger, is somebody who's seen as sort of conveying this, and also because he got an alliance with the Greens. Paradoxically, German Greens being much more government-ready than French Greens. So that's a very big thing. And in terms of the 2% of French GDP to NATO, we've always had it. I don't know why you say that France has not contributed 2% of her GDP to NATO because to the military, because we actually do. But in terms of personalities and in terms of distrust between the two, it is founded on a great deal of ideology and not just feelings. But I would add that in terms of personalities, they are completely sort of non-compatible, whereas Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron were more compatible. Emmanuel Macron had great admiration for Merkel for many reasons, including her sort of genuineness and the longevity that she had in politics. And that is not the case with Olaf Scholz.
Zafer Mese, when Nicolas Sarkozy came to power, I think it's fair to say that they were poles apart, but they found a way to make it work with Angela Merkel. With these two leaders, do you feel that there is potential to actually make or take steps forward?
I doubt it. I would love to give you a positive answer, but I doubt it because it's not only the personalities. There is a political culture between France and Germany, and Scholz is not the guy who can adapt on it, And the president has huge power, and on the other side, Scholz has a three-party coalition, and there are tensions within the coalition. And to box it out, the topics to come to a conclusion is on the German side not so possible. But on the other hand, when Merkel became chancellor and Sarkozy, Angela Merkel and Sarkozy, known as Merkozy, because they were very close at the time due to their unity, prevented the Eurozone from breaking apart during the financial crisis, despite Minister Schäuble at those time calling for the exclusion of the Greeks. But for Turkey, it was not the best constellation, They invented the exclusive or the how you call it the new partnership model for Turkey, and Turkey didn't accept it. But coming back to Scholz, it can be the case that they can agree on various issues, but in 2 years there are elections in Germany, and Macron will not have a third office time. So I think they will try to superficially agree on the issues the next 3 days, knowing that the problems, the dispute, the dissents will continue on major issues.
James, let me turn to you. It said that if there is a will, there is a way. What I'm getting from Zafer is that there is no political capital or energy on both sides to mend the fences here.
Well, I'm not sure I fully agree. This is obviously pulling out the bit of a big stops, the big guns as a state visit. This is the first one in 24 years. So I think what Macron is doing is very strategic of him. I've actually heard from some of the Eastern partner states that Macron is trying to isolate Scholz. Now, I think what's interesting about this visit, if we're reading between the lines, this isn't a Scholz Macron bilateral meeting, which they've had many of. This is actually one that goes straight above Scholz's head, in theory, to the president of the Federal Republic, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. So I don't actually think, although he will sing his praises publicly, I don't think Macron is viewing Scholz as necessarily the partner he wants, and he's viewing him almost as a problem that needs to be solved. And I actually think this is what we're seeing today. Macron reaching out to the German population as well as other dignitaries. He is, of course, one of the most popular politicians, international politicians in Germany, much more politically popular in Germany than he is back home, where his relationship is troubled. But Germans, and particularly the German elite, are very much Europhiles, and they sort of think they would like a president with Macron who has a bit of style. He's very educated. He can quote. But in practice, they choose Merkel's and Scholz's, who are, quite competent, like to be seen as competent bureaucrats without too much charm, which in German politics is actually sometimes viewed with a little bit of suspicion. And, this is true as well for Macron. He's giving these speeches about European involvement in Ukraine. But is he actually following up by giving Ukraine as much aid as Germany?
James, thank you. Anne-Elisabeth, let me turn to you. We've been talking for the better part of the show about the differences between the two leaders. Let's talk about a common denominator. I think it's fair to say that the rise of the far right in terms of politics is an issue that concerns both of them. And Macron is definitely playing his cards in a special way on this trip. Is this something that they agree upon?
It is something that they agree upon, and it is something that's also seen as sort of the existence of the AfD and the sort of raising the point that AfD is so right-wing that they've just been kicked out from their Brussels party, Identity and Democracy, is something that will enable Macron to tar the French right, namely Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, exactly with the stain of the AfD. So that's extremely useful politically. We now know that Marine Le Pen is trying very hard. She sits in Identity and Democracy, therefore, until recently with AfD. And she has been making overtures to Giorgia Meloni, who is the main leader within the ECR, European Conservatives and Reformists, which is the other hard right party in Brussels and far more palatable than Identity and Democracy. So we can see that on both sides, the German sort of repulsor is something that's very useful. And of course, most parties in Germany can have a coalition exactly on the same platform. So that's something that's very useful.
All right, Zafer and James, I want to get some closing comments from you. Zafer, let me start with you very quickly. How do you get more cohesion instead of discourse?
I mean, it will be more discord in the relations. As I mentioned, the situation will not improve. What I've heard from Chancellor's office. So I think there will be, as I mentioned, they will keep the level on the public that they agree on a lot of issues, but disagree issues will be not mentioned.
James, last word to you.
I think there are real structural issues in the Franco-German relationship that aren't going to be overcome by a few days of a state visit. I think nuclear power is one that Berlin has been willing to compromise on an EU level, but never would domestically. And I think we're not going to be hearing about the real elephant in the room, which is China and manufacturing, because France wants more protectionism in Europe, and Germany wants to keep exporting to whoever and using labor from wherever. So I think ultimately this is not going to bring as much together, but it may, and we can hope it will, bring a little bit more unitedness and cohesion on the question of European security in Ukraine.
Okay, James Jackson, Zafer Mese, and obviously Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Do appreciate it. Thanks for watching. You can follow us on X and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Ali Janayanash, and we'll see you next time.